He cared for her like a son, bathed her, fed her, cried with her. Then one day, the police knocked on his door. Daniel never called her mother-in-law. That word felt too clinical, too cold for the warmth Margaret had shown him since the very first day he walked through her door. From the moment he and Emily started dating, Margaret had made space for him, not just in her home, but in her heart. When Daniel lost his own mother to a sudden stroke at 24, grief became a second skin. He carried it into every room, every conversation, every silence. Emily tried to help in her own way, but it was Margaret who simply sat beside him one night and said, "You don't have to say anything. I'm just here." That silence healed more than words ever could. Years later, after marrying Emily, Daniel and Margaret grew even closer. He'd call her every Sunday morning to ask if she needed anything from the store. When her knees began to fail, he built a handrail for her bathroom, something her own daughter hadn't even noticed she needed. When Margaret was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, Daniel didn't hesitate. He rearranged his work schedule, then eventually left his job entirely to become her full-time caregiver. He didn't see it as a sacrifice. He saw it as love in action. He bathed her gently, humming songs she used to sing when Emily was little. He reminded her of her name on the days she forgot. He celebrated her small victories, like remembering the words to an old Sinatra tune, as if they were Olympic gold. They shared quiet breakfasts, soft laughter, and sometimes the kind of silence only deep affection can hold. But things between him and Emily had started to wither. She came home later each night, claiming long meetings and traffic that didn't add up. When she was home, she was distant, cold. Sometimes she'd stare at him caring for Margaret with a look Daniel couldn't quite read. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't jealousy. It was something heavier, something darker. One evening, after Daniel helped Margaret into bed, he entered the kitchen to find Emily sitting at the table, wine glass full, eyes glassier still. "You spend more time with her than with me," she said, not looking up. Daniel sighed. "She needs me, Em." "And I don't?" That question hung in the air like smoke. He sat across from her, hands folded, choosing each word carefully. "She's losing herself day by day. I can't let her feel alone in that." Emily scoffed, drained her glass, and left the room without another word. That night, Margaret called out in confusion, thinking Daniel was her late husband, Frank. He held her as she cried, rocking gently, whispering, "It's okay. I'm here, sweetheart. I've got you." From the hallway, Emily watched the scene unfold, her face unreadable. Daniel never knew she saw. But that night, she didn't come to bed. The next morning, she barely spoke, left early, didn't kiss him goodbye. Daniel told himself it was stress, that the toll of watching her mother decline was too much, that maybe, just maybe, she felt guilt for not doing more. But deep down, something itched at him, a slow burn behind his ribs, a silence that felt less like absence and more like retreat. Still, Daniel remained steady, faithful, devoted. Not just to Margaret, but to the memory of the woman he married, the version of Emily he still believed lived somewhere beneath the frost. What he didn't know was that she had already crossed a line he could never uncross. And the first knock was coming soon.
It was a Tuesday. Rain slid down the kitchen window in thin, trembling lines. like the house itself was crying. Daniel was pouring Margaret's tea, green with a slice of lemon, just the way she liked it, when the doorbell rang. He glanced at the clock. 10:14 a.m. Too early for mail, too late for neighbors. He wiped his hands and opened the door. Two men in dark jackets, no smiles. One of them held a badge. "Mr. Daniel Carter?" Daniel nodded slowly, a strange pressure building behind his eyes. "We're with Adult Protective Services. We need to ask you a few questions. May we come in?" Margaret, in her robe, peeked from the hallway, confused. "Frank?" she murmured, mistaking Daniel again. Daniel's throat tightened. "Of course," he said, stepping aside. They sat at the dining table while Daniel tried to gather his thoughts. One of them, Agent Monroe, opened a thin folder and slid a document across the table. "There's been an anonymous report of elder abuse," Monroe said flatly, "specifically regarding neglect, emotional mistreatment, and financial manipulation involving Mrs. Margaret Hayes." Daniel stared at the paper, unable to move. It felt like someone had punched the air from his lungs. "Abuse?" he whispered. "You think I would hurt her?" Monroe didn't flinch. "We're not accusing, we're investigating." The second agent spoke up. "Does she have access to her bank accounts?" "She doesn't remember her PIN half the time," Daniel said. "I take care of her bills. She authorized that 2 years ago." "Do you have that authorization in writing?" He did. Somewhere. A drawer, maybe. He couldn't think straight. Margaret shuffled into the room, her face blank. "Is it time for church?" Daniel rushed to her side. No, Mom, not today." Monroe observed them quietly. "She calls you Frank sometimes. We were told that's her late husband's name." Daniel nodded. "She's losing pieces of herself. Some days she thinks I'm him. Other days she knows exactly who I am. She calls me her boy." The second agent jotted something down. They stayed another 30 minutes, took notes, asked sterile questions in a house that still smelled like cinnamon and hand lotion. When they finally left, Daniel sat at the table in silence, his tea gone cold. Emily walked in 10 minutes later, sunglasses still on despite the rain. "What's going on?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked, and noticed she didn't seem surprised. "APS came," he said. "Someone filed a report." Her lips parted slightly. "What kind of report?" "You tell me." She didn't answer. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His mind churned through names. Who would do this? Who even came to the house? Only the nurse from the memory clinic, a few neighbors, a cousin who lived out of state. It didn't add up. No one knew the full picture but him. And Emily. The next morning, while retrieving the mail, Daniel found something strange in the mailbox. A plain white envelope. No name, no return address. Inside, a single piece of paper, typed, no handwriting. Sometimes, love blinds us to what's really happening. Not everything that looks like care is care. No signature, just that. Cold and cruel. Daniel stood in the driveway, the paper trembling in his hands. The sky above him was gray and heavy, like it was holding back a storm. He read it, and again. It wasn't just a warning, it was a weapon. Inside the house, Margaret was humming softly to herself, unaware that her world, and Daniel's, was quietly coming apart. And Emily? Emily was upstairs, door closed, humming the same tune. He froze. She had heard Margaret sing that song before. Only her.
Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, the anonymous letter still folded in his hand. Its words gnawed at him like termites in the foundation of a house, slow, invisible, but devastating. He had spent years building trust, carving out a life of care, patience, and sacrifice. And now that life was being chipped away by someone who knew exactly where to strike. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily's reaction. No shock, no outrage, just quiet acknowledgement. Her face didn't twitch, her voice didn't rise. And that song, Margaret's song, hummed under her breath right after Daniel received the letter. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a message. But why? That night, as Margaret slept in her recliner, soft snores filling the room like slow waves, Daniel opened the storage closet and pulled out an old baby monitor. He remembered buying it when Emily considered starting a family. They never used it. It had sat, untouched, beneath winter blankets and photo albums. The next morning, he drove to the electronics store and bought a small security camera. Nothing fancy, just motion-activated, silent, invisible. He installed it in the corner of the living room, angled toward the entryway and the recliner where Margaret spent most of her day. He didn't tell Emily. In the evenings, he pretended nothing had changed. He made dinner, washed the dishes, asked Emily how her day had been. She gave vague answers, never making eye contact. The space between them was growing wider by the hour, like a bridge slowly rotting at its base. For days, the footage showed nothing unusual, just Margaret dozing, Margaret watching old game shows, Margaret staring out the window like she was waiting for someone who never came. Until Thursday. Daniel was reviewing the footage at 1:13 a.m., the only time he had to himself. Margaret was sitting upright that afternoon, unusually alert. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twisting with anxious energy. She looked around the room like she was listening to someone speak, but no one else was there. Then she began to cry. Not the confused, quiet tears of dementia. This was grief, deep, heavy sobs that shook her shoulders and made her chest rise and fall in shuddering waves. Daniel leaned closer to the screen, heart racing. Margaret pressed her fingers to her lips. "I didn't want this. I told her not to. I told her this would destroy him." She paused, looked toward the hallway. Her eyes were terrified. "I wish I hadn't said anything. She twisted it. She lied. She lied about him." Daniel's blood turned cold. He froze the frame, rewound it, played it again. She twisted it. She lied about him. There was no doubt now. Someone had manipulated Margaret, coerced her, or worse, used her fragile memory against her. And that someone had to be Emily. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, his laptop glowing like an open wound. His hands trembled as he closed the screen and looked across the room where Margaret's silhouette rested under a quilt. He thought of all the nights he held her hand while she cried, all the meals he made while Emily scrolled her phone in silence, all the days he protected a woman who was now being used as a weapon against him. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was real. It had a voice, a face. But why? Why would Emily do this? Money? No, Margaret didn't have much. Control? Maybe. Jealousy? Possibly. But there was something else too. Something that had been rotting in Emily for years, silently, invisibly, until it found a way to surface through cruelty masked as concern. Daniel closed the laptop and stood up slowly. This was no longer just about defending himself. This was about protecting the one person in that house who truly saw him as family. He turned toward Margaret, who stirred softly in her sleep, and he made a silent vow. "I'll get the truth out, Mom, even if it tears everything apart."
The next morning, the house felt colder. Not in temperature, but in something deeper. Like the warmth had been drained from the walls. Daniel moved silently through the kitchen, every clink of the spoon against the teacup sounding louder than it should. Margaret was still asleep. Emily hadn't come home the night before. He didn't call her. Instead, he reviewed the footage again, not to confirm what he had already seen, but to remind himself he wasn't losing his mind. Margaret's words, shaky but clear, played again in his head. She twisted it. She lied about him. He needed proof. Real, irrefutable proof. Something that couldn't be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused woman. So, that afternoon, when Margaret was having a rare moment of lucidity, eyes focused, voice steady, he gently sat beside her on the couch and placed a voice recorder on the table, in plain sight. "Mom," he said, using the word with deliberate tenderness, "can I ask you something important?" She blinked slowly.
Of course, Daniel. Do you remember someone asking you about me? About how I treat you? Her eyes darkened, like clouds moving over the sun. I do, she said softly. Emily. She asked strange things. If you ever left me alone too long. If you ever got angry. If I felt scared. Daniel clenched his jaw. And then what? Margaret looked away, her hands trembling in her lap. She got quiet, cold. She said maybe I was too confused to know what was real. Daniel clenched his jaw. She said she'd take care of it, that she'd make sure you never hurt me again. I never did, Mom. I know, she said, tears forming in her eyes. I never believed she would do something like this. He reached over and held her hand, not just as comfort, but as a promise. That evening, Emily returned home. Her face was unreadable, as always. She set her keys down, kicked off her shoes, and walked past Daniel without a word. Emily,
She stopped, didn't turn. We need to talk. She exhaled, annoyed, as if she were being asked to do chores. Can it wait? No. They sat in the kitchen, the table between them feeling more like a courtroom than a dinner space. I know what you did, he said. She blinked. Excuse me? The letter, the report, manipulating your own mother. Emily laughed once, dry and sharp. You're seriously going to take her word for it. She thinks you're her dead husband half the time. Daniel leaned forward. But you don't. You knew exactly what you were doing. She didn't deny it. For a moment, silence hung like smoke between them. You don't understand, she said finally. She always loved you more than me. Always. You walk in and suddenly she calls you her son. Not me, not her daughter. You replaced me in my own family. Daniel stared at her stunned. This was never about her, he said. This was about your ego. She abandoned me emotionally long before she forgot my name. And you, her little hero, made me feel like I never mattered. Maybe I wanted you out of the way. Maybe I just wanted to feel seen. So you accused me of abuse? He said, voice breaking. She didn't answer. Daniel stood slowly. I recorded her today. She remembers everything. She remembers what you asked, what you said, what you did. Her face went pale. You wouldn't. I already did. For the first time in months, Emily looked afraid. Not sad, not sorry, just afraid. You should leave, Daniel said. Emily stood, her hands shaking slightly, and walked to the door. No screaming, no apologies, just the soft click of the front door closing behind her. Daniel exhaled, a long, deep breath that felt like it had been stuck in his chest for years. Upstairs, Margaret was humming faintly. He climbed the stairs slowly, step by step, feeling the weight of what had just happened. The truth was out, and it had cost him everything he once thought he could save. He opened Margaret's door. She looked up and smiled. You look tired, she said. I am. Come sit. He did. She reached for his hand. And in that small gesture, he felt something whole, something pure. A bond that even betrayal couldn't sever. The house was quieter now. But for the first time, it didn't feel hollow. It felt honest.
The morning after Emily left, the house felt intact. Not empty, not abandoned, intact. As if her presence had been a weight. And now, with her gone, the walls could finally breathe. Daniel moved quietly through the kitchen, the ritual of tea and oatmeal steadying his hands. He didn't cry. He didn't pace. He moved with a clarity that only comes after a storm has passed and revealed what's still standing. Margaret was seated by the window, wrapped in a shawl Daniel had knit for her during the winter. Her eyes were distant but calm.
"Is she gone?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. Yes. Margaret looked down at her hands. She used to be such a sweet girl. I don't know when she turned so cold. She never really accepted what we had, the closeness, the way we took care of each other. She was always afraid of being left behind, but instead of coming closer, she pushed everything away. Daniel sat beside her. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was thoughtful, cleansing. But peace wasn't enough. Later that day, Daniel made a copy of the audio recording and took it to an attorney. Not because he wanted revenge, but because Emily's report had left a permanent mark on his record. Even if unfounded, even if ultimately dismissed, the fact remained. Someone had weaponized his compassion, and the law had listened. The attorney listened to the tape in full, eyebrows furrowed. "You realize this is enough to initiate a formal claim for defamation and false reporting," she said. Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to destroy her. I just want the truth documented." "Then you need to file. Quietly if you prefer, but officially." He nodded. "Do it."
The process was set in motion. Nothing dramatic, just slow-moving justice. Emily would receive notice. She'd face questioning. If she confessed or was proven to have manipulated her mother's statements, her credibility and any future accusations would lose their power. Still, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about her. The years they'd shared, the version of Emily who once held his hand in the rain, who whispered "I love yous" in the dark, who laughed so loud it shook his ribs. He missed her. Not the one who stood across the kitchen table last week, bitter, weaponized, but the woman she used to be. But some people rot from the inside quietly, like fruit left too long on a shelf. By the time you see the mold, it's already rooted deep. Weeks passed, the case advanced, Margaret's health, surprisingly, stabilized. She had more good days than bad now. Maybe because the air had cleared. Maybe because she no longer felt like a pawn in her daughter's quiet war. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the wind bend the trees, Margaret turned to him. "Daniel," she said, "if you want to go, you can." He looked at her, confused. "Go where?" "Live your life. You've given me years I didn't deserve. Maybe it's time you gave some of them back to yourself." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not leaving you. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," he said quietly. "Not out of debt, out of choice." She nodded, and for a moment they sat in silence, two people who had found in each other something deeper than obligation. In the final hearing, the court acknowledged Daniel's evidence. The case against him was formally dismissed. Emily didn't attend. She submitted a letter, vague and cold, claiming misunderstanding and emotional strain. The judge noted inconsistencies in her prior statements and recommended psychological evaluation if further allegations were made. It wasn't vindictive, it was clinical. But to Daniel, it felt like closure. That night, he lit a candle in the kitchen, not for Margaret, for himself, for the part of him that had nearly died trying to be good in a house that had stopped recognizing goodness. He didn't burn bridges, he didn't retaliate, but he didn't forget. Some betrayals don't need punishment, they punish themselves. Sometimes the people you protect the most are the ones who hurt you deepest. But true character isn't proven in how you strike back. It's in how you choose to stay kind, even after everything breaks. Some betrayals don't come with shouting or slammed doors. They arrive quietly, disguised as concern, hidden in the voices of those who were supposed to protect you. Daniel didn't just lose a marriage. He lost the illusion that love alone is enough to make someone stay. But in the end, he chose not to become like her. Not because he was weak, but because he knew holding on to hate is just another way to keep bleeding while the other walks away unharmed. Sometimes true forgiveness is just that, leaving in peace and letting time deliver the justice. If this story spoke to you, if any part of it felt familiar, leave a comment below. This channel exists for those who've been hurt and survived. Subscribe for more raw human stories. Here, we don't ignore pain. We turn it into strength.